Organisational structures: functional, divisional, matrix, tall, and flat. Before we go into these different structures of organisations, let's first of all take a step back and consider what is the point of any organisational structure. In an ideal world, our frontline staff member is going to make the decision quickly and they're going to make it correctly. They're going to consider all of the goals for the organisation. You know, finance, HR, marketing, sales, production, all of those factors, and they're going to reach a balanced and correct decision, almost as if they were the CEO, and that CEO as well had all knowledge for the organisation. It's not really realistic because of that frontline staff member's skills and breadth of knowledge. If they had that level of skills and breadth of knowledge, they'd already be the CEO and they probably would have set the company up themselves. So that's not a realistic position. Higher up management might be more skilled. So in an established sort of sustainable organisation, typically the higher up management are they're on a higher pay grade. They've been promoted over a series of years, and we've been able to have a series of recruitment exercises, and so the higher up management is going to be more skilled. But they're not going to necessarily know the position on the ground to be able to make those micro-level decisions. So structures continually wrestle with this decision-making issue. Who's the best person to make the decision? The person who's more skilled. But do they have the level of knowledge to make a decision? And who's the person who's got the most knowledge? The person in the front line. So we have these structures continually wrestling with this sort of decision-making issue. Managers themselves also as well to tussle with other managers within an organisation over controls and their objectives. The CEO wants to generate accountability, and also as well they want to make decision makings. The one thing that the CEO doesn't want to have is managers who aren't accountable, so that they avoid having accountability for any decisions they make, or alternatively managers that try and avoid making decisions or being blamed. Basically managers who try and avoid blame because then that guarantees failure because nobody makes a decision. So CEOs are always wanting to generate accountability in decision making. Staff turnover occurs. Managers search for their own career progression. Better managers either are going to be promoted within the organisation to get to their level, or alternatively they're going to leave us. And so we want to make sure that we can keep hold of the better managers. So in reality, what we have then is these different factors that are going to sort of be driving how an organisation actually operates. And our structure we'll be looking at our structures to try and get the best position so that those individuals make the decisions effectively. And that's really all that all company structures are about, are the making of effective decisions based on the practical realities that we face on the ground. So we've got three structures that we're going to consider: functional, divisional, matrix, and then we've got tall versus flat structures. So functional first. In our function department, we have our organisation segmented on the basis of functions, and that's our specialisms really. So we've got the production department, we've got a marketing department, we've got a finance department, we've got HR, we've got sales, what have you. There's a hierarchy of management, and then those functions are led by managers. We have groups of specialists in each function, so the HR department is full of HR specialists. The finance department's got the finance director in and a series of finance specialists. And the advantage of this is, well, we've got a clear structure for communication and decision making. We have a finance department. If you're the production manager and you want a budget, a pricing issue, whatever, you go along to the finance department. You can have a discussion with them about it, or you can talk about budgets and how we go and buy things and what have you. You've got a clear structure. If we've got an issue with a staff member, and the sales department's got an issue with a staff member, then from a disciplinary point of view, you can go along to the HR department and ask, right, well, what is the policy and what do I do to address then? So we've got a clear structure for our communication. We've got a clear structure for our decision making. Who's going to make the decisions? We've got specialisms of function as well. So nobody's going to be a finance and a HR specialist and a marketing specialist and a production specialist all in one. So we're going to have these sort of specialisms that are going to, because they are disciplines of themselves. And so we've got this specialisation of function going on. We've got a clear pathway for our progression, and also as well we've got a structure to be able to replace our staff members. So let's say we've got a finance department, and it might have administrative staff, it might have a junior or a trainee accountant, there's a management accountant, a financial controller, and a finance director. If one of those leaves, we've got abilities to slot them in and what have you, new people in. What's the disadvantage? Well, the key disadvantage of functional organisations is that we can have silos across these different functions. So the HR department might decide to sort of set up a whole series of processes that are great for the HR department, but not great for everybody else. So we can have issues in terms of communication across the organisation. Does let's say the HR department not talk to anybody? Let's say, or does the production just consider it as the most important department, and therefore tells everybody else to get knotted? It's that kind of thing where we have this sort of idea. We kind of have communication issues across the organisation. We could also as well have particular managers following their own goals. So a particular organisation or section might implement a process that is great for that department. Let's say the HR department introduces an administrative process, but unfortunately in terms of a cost-benefit analysis, the organisation is in a worse position because it's now taken up huge amounts of time of other people. Quality departments, for example, can often do that. It can also be difficult to create a speed of change as well, because one particular manager in one of the segments, one of our sort of functions, has to then go and sort of organise and negotiate with all of the other functions to be able to achieve something. And also as well, we've got this sort of length up and down of communication chains of the managers, where things go up one of the functions, across and down one of the functions. So you have a problem with speed of change. So this is what our functional position would be. And let's say this salesperson has been talking to this marketing person across here. There might be an issue. It might go all the way up the marketing chain, all through the CEO, and all the way down as well. So you can see in terms of that speed of change, it can go all the way up, across, all the way down. And so that is the big disadvantage of the functional structure. The next structure is divisional. And so in the divisional one, a company is segmented into divisions based upon products or projects. Each of those divisions carries its own function. So there would be, let's say we'll take General Electric, and we've got this microwave division and we've got this turbine division. Each of those divisions carries its own HR function, its own sales function, its own marketing function, what have you. So here we have a divisional structure, and here we have the US division, and it's carrying its production, but it's also carrying its marketing, it's also carrying its sales, it'll also have its finance to function and all the rest. So it's basically an autonomous functional structure within a wider organisation. So there's sort of divisions, so we're saying about. In terms of our divisional structure, well, it can cope with a bigger organisation. So once we get to a particular size, and also in terms of if we've got something where there are products or projects that have got no interrelation with one another, this divisional structure can cope with that kind of organisation. We get greater ownership of management of their divisions. If I am the HR director and I'm over 20 different types of products in there, how much engagement do I have with one particular type of product to make it move forward? If I'm the HR manager and I'm associated with one particular product, I'm part of that team to make it drive forward. So we've got greater accountability typically within big organisations that go down the divisional route, because we're all in the same boat together. We hang together or we hang individually. In terms of the disadvantages, well, you can have interdivisional rivalry. And especially when there's sort of similar types of products. So let's say we'll take between a division between, let's say, Volvo and BMW, you could have a lot of interdivisional rivalry where we're in that same organisation, but we have these separate divisions. And so we can have that interdivisional rivalry, which can be destructive. We're only using our best managers for part of the organisation. So we might have an amazing finance director, but they're only being used for one division in the wider organisation. And we have more managers. So we have more duplication, more managers, more support functions. So we've got a lot more duplication going on. That duplication can have us in two things. On the one hand, it's going to cost more, and on the other hand, we sort of might not be able to use the best of our resource across all the functions. It's only sitting in one. We might have a series of smaller finance software systems, let's say, rather than one big one. So we can have this sort of inefficiency that can be driven from the divisional structure. On the one hand, we might get efficiency on the basis of decision making. On the other hand, we might get inefficiency on the basis of cost. In a matrix structure, the matrix structure is trying to get the best of both worlds. Now, before we start thinking, well, the best of both worlds, that's great, so matrix structures are better. No, they're not. They're attempting to try that. Do they achieve it in reality? Well, all employees are organised on the basis of two parameters. Their specialism. So let's say the HR person and their product. So let's say then the car division, the HR, the HR person in the car division. And so there's many teams within this organisation. So the organisation is now based upon teams rather than on divisions or rather than on functions. And these teams have employees based on these two parameters. And these two parameters also as well have heads. So there would be a head of HR who would parcel out all of their staff members into these various different teams. There would be a head of production, let's say, who would sample out all their staff members amongst all the car division and what have you, in different products. The advantage of this is it can be faster communications between functions. We've sort of flattened down effectively the management in there, because we've got the divisional sort of side going on, which flattens down the management structure. But we've also as well got the flattening out of the specialism sort of side, the specialist functional side as well, in terms of the HR department being based within each project. The employees see all the various departments, so they might get a better understanding of the whole organisation. And so it is this flatter decision making with higher up managers closer to the frontline decision making. What are the disadvantages? Well, there are a few. Employees, can they really have two masters? Because what you're getting is you're getting pulled in two different directions and two sets of instructions. One from the head of the specialism, so let's say the head of the HR specialism, and one from the head of the team for production, let's say in here. Whose instructions take priority when they're not aligned? And in theory, all managers act in the best interests of the organisation, and all managers make rational instructions to the organisation and to employees based upon perfect knowledge. In reality, it doesn't happen like that. In reality, it's far more different from that kind of thing. There's also more managers, more expense, more confusion, and do they try and pull the organisation in different ways, in different directions? Managers are of different abilities, and as a consequence, there are different abilities and different types of things, from intelligence to the ability to discuss and communicate with one another. Do they end up pulling the organisation in different directions? And then the last one is with this sort of thing where you're part of a team for one thing, and then you go along and you're part of a team for another thing, and then you're part of a team for another thing, and do you ever actually get to understand and own part of the organisation and become a specialist in it, or are you just a bunch of consultants that drift from one thing to another? So very similar to almost like the civil service, really, where one day they'll be in health, and the other day there'll be a finance specialist, and one 6 month period they'll be in the health department, and then they'll be in the department for education, and they'll be in the Ministry of Defence and whatever. And they never really end up understanding any of the particular departments that they're in. And so you can see that the civil service is often a perfect example of a matrix kind of structure. It doesn't work. So here we have our matrix structure in here. We've got our projects here, and we've got our specialism here, and we're creating little groups of different organisations here. Slightly flatter function, because obviously we've not got the level of hierarchy of managers to go through. But also as well, you can see how the employees in this particular production group are being given instructions by two different sets of managers. What you can often see within a matrix structure, let's say, is that you might have something that might be more like one of the sets has got less sort of direct line management control. What I would also say as well in terms of practicality is as an employee can only have one line manager, whoever does their appraisal, and so they're the ones that will typically get the instruction. You might also though get a lead. So let's say this was in a college, we might have our sort of specialisms here, our leads here. We might have our curriculum departments here, let's say there. The managers in the curriculum departments are going to be the ones who have the main lead. They will be the ones who are line managing. Yeah. Or alternatively, these ones, the finance manager controls the finance staff members, the line manager the finance staff managers. But if the manager on the other side, they have an influence in there, if they are sufficiently strong and robust, then they will drive through the change. If they're not and they're a bit weak, the matrix structures start to break down, really. Okay, so that's our three types of structures that we can have. Now what we're going to have is flat versus tall. And again, before we start into that, we need to sort of consider what's going to go on. So, we need to decide, don't we, who is the best person for the task? And the best person for the task is for making the decision. So who is it, really? In the words of Prince 2, enthusiastic and available is not the criteria for assigning work. A flat structure assumes that it's the frontline employee who knows best, and what a flat structure is going to try and do is seek to empower them to make the decisions. So it's going to give them as much accountability, but also as much autonomy as possible. So that's what a flat structure is trying to do. It's trying to sort of drive the decisions down. A tall structure is assuming that it's the senior manager who knows better. Really, there'll be a series of hierarchies to go through it because the senior manager can't do everything in there, and the frontline workers follow instructions. There are many layers of hierarchy. In an ideal world, the organisation is going to be as flat as possible, given the staff members that it employs. So it's going to be as flat as possible, but that level of flatness is going to be dependent upon the type of people it employs and the work that it does. So that's what we got into before we go into flat versus tall structures. So, considerations. Flat versus tall. Well, the fewer managers that we can have in any kind of structure, the less management salary there's going to be. There's also as well, depending on our skills and level of knowledge. We might have frontline workers that actually they're not required to be that skilled. What they're going to do is they're going to follow a series of instructions. So we might have one manager who then reports to another manager who's sort of setting out the instructions or whatever. We might not need to empower our frontline staff members. Alternatively, they might be really very, very high technically skilled staff members. So let's say in the internet world, and they might really require a whole series of autonomy and accountability and whatever. They might not thrive on that because otherwise they are going to go and leave and move to somewhere else. So we've got this level of skills and knowledge that we're going to consider. We're also as well going to consider, well, the flatter that you can make a structure, the clearer the communication is from the CEO. And we're always going to assume that the CEO is the one who knows, who's got the best level of skills and knowledge in there. Otherwise, why are we paying them so much, really? And so if their communication can get right from the top to the frontline staff member without any distortions in the middle by other managers, that's the best position. Also, as well, let's remember these middle managers might distort things from their own end. There'll be quite a few middle managers go, well, we've been told to do this by the higher ups. I think it's a stupid idea, but we've got to get on with it. Now, of course, the higher up manager has just been undercut by the middle manager, and in an ideal world would prefer that the middle manager didn't exist at all. So this clearer communication from the top is not just simply a position of passing on messages. It's also that the the middle manager might have their own personal things there. Most often the avoidance of accountability or the avoidance of tackling issues, particularly staff members' issues, non-compliance. So at the top you want to have your message going straight to the front line. The fewer managers that you have to go through to achieve that, the better. So the flatter structures are the better. You motivate employees. The more employees own and can make their decision makers on the front line, the more typically they will be happy. It might be a question though that you might have certain areas where employees might not want that level of accountability. It might the level of skills and the level of pay grade might sort of not really sort of require those kind of employees, and those kind of employees might even actually shy away from wanting the accountability for the decision making. Not above my pay grade, mate, is a typical sort of thing. And in fairness, that's just a straight up decision of pay versus pressure, really. Well, work-life balance probably is the best, is the modern term. We also as well have the size of the organisation. So how large is the organisation? How interdependent it is, and what is the level of control that's needed? Let's imagine that we're going to build a spaceship that's going to fly to Mars. If we were giving everybody a huge amount of autonomy, and we've got this particular frontline staff member, and they're making the button for our ejector panel, if they sort of say, well, yeah, I felt like I was going to be really autonomous here, and so I was going to make a few decisions that actually didn't fit within the overall plan, it's going to end up as a bit of a disaster. So we have that idea of what is the level of, or the size of the organisation, what's the size of the project, how much interdependence is there between all of our staff members, how much control is needed as well. And so do we have tasks that need to be delivered to particular staff members? And the other thing that we can also have as well is that staff members often pick and choose what they want to do. In particular, managers like to avoid tackling staff member issues. So that's the key one that managers like to avoid. So our flat versus our tall structures, if we left a perfect flat autonomous structure in place, half the job wouldn't get done, especially the tackling of staff members. We also as well have another threat with the flat structure. Always within organisations, we're attempting to try and build what's known as barriers to entry and barriers to exit, really, to be able to have some kind of control over our product. Well, if we have a frontline staff member in a flat structure who basically knows everything about our product and nobody else really knows it, well, what happens if they're making all the decisions and then they decide to leave? So let's say we have a financial controller and they are setting all of the budgets and doing realistically the operations director's job for them. They call the tunes of what we build and whatever, and there's a finance director above them who isn't doing that, and they're doing what they're doing. Well, what happens when that financial controller goes and gets a promotion at another organisation and leaves? Suddenly now there's a hole within our organisation. So there's a threat with flat structures as well, especially if they're left completely unchecked, that we can wake up one day and our staff members leave and we've got no more business. That's the consideration of everything then. Hopefully that was helpful in terms of our structures and answering your questions. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video. Bye.